Keys to the Shop, Founder Friday edition. Today we're talking with Jack Benchakul of Endorffiene in Los Angeles, California. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DiFirio. I'm your host for the show. Always happy to have you here. And please do subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Just hit subscribe wherever you get podcasts right now, where you're listening. And that really helps the show out. It helps you out a lot too, because you get to be updated with new episodes as they air. There's quite a bit of great content coming out from Keys to the Shop every month. So go ahead and hit subscribe and also share these episodes and share Keys to the Shop with your friends, with your social media followers, anywhere you can. That is the number one thing that you can do to help spread the word about Keys to the Shop and get these great stories and insights and topics into everybody's hands. So thanks very much, everybody, for doing that. Now, Keys to the Shop is not just a podcast, it's also a coaching and consulting company. Keys to the Shop Consulting works one-on-one with owner-operators who really want to deliver an amazing experience to their guests and to their staff by helping them find clarity, solutions, and systems to build a thriving coffee bar, whether that's just starting out for the first time and you need an advisor along the path of getting open, or you've been open for a while, but you want to level up your operations, people, and quality, and you've got some special projects that you need some assistance with. Let's talk and find out how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Go ahead and email me, chris@keystotheshop.com, and we'll set up a free discovery call. We will talk all about what's going on in your business, give you some ideas of how to move forward, and how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. All brewers are not created equal. What you decide to use for your brewed coffee makes a huge difference in what people remember about your shop. Obviously, flavor is one of the best things that you can use as a marketing tool for your business, and consistency on top of that obviously is even better. And one of the best pieces of equipment you can get to highlight the coffees that you serve your guests is the ground control Cyclops brewer from Voga Coffee. This is a revolutionary brewer. It is changing the game for batch brew because the SCA award-winning technology gives the user unprecedented control over an incredible range of flavors for each coffee that's brewed. And this is not just for batch brew coffee. You can also make tea, batch iced lattes, batch cold brew. This introduces a whole different way to bring in profitability and efficiency on your bar on top of the level up in quality. So check them out at groundcontrol.coffee to learn more about getting this machine in your shop. Right now, for a limited time, they have a limited stock. You can get 50% off, half off, a ground control Cyclops brewer for your coffee shop. If you've been on the fence about this and you've just kind of thought, maybe now's not the right time, this seems like now might be the right time. So again, check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. Customers love great beverages. Customers who don't drink regular milk, they want alternative. They want the plant-based beverages. They expect quality. And they have a lot of choices available to them these days. And that's really great for them. They can be choosy. And you want to serve them something that is competitive in quality, in consistency. And I think the Barista series from Pacific is exactly that. This is the line of plant-based performance beverages that is designed specifically for baristas and tested by amazing baristas from around the world before that's even released to the public. It stands up to the heat from steaming. It produces awesome silky texture, keeps the balance focused on the coffee. So the Barista series is a win, honestly. I've used it my entire career in coffee. It is wonderful, and I appreciate all the work that they have done over at Pacific in the Barista series to make this something that we feel confident in coffee. So if you are interested in this, you want to get samples in your store, hit them up over at pacificfoodservice.com and they will send that to you and you can see for yourself. So again, if you're looking for high quality, consistency, dependability from a company who's all about helping you succeed, then I think you should be using the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, welcome to another Founder Friday. This time in the month of March, we are covering a store that is much acclaimed and is very unique in the way that it pursues craft and quality in coffee. I think you're really going to find this interview interesting. We're talking with Jack Benchakul, who is the founder, along with his cousin Ttaya, of Endorffiene in Los Angeles. Endorffiene is an award winning bar. It has been acclaimed by famous food writers and critics, magazines, including being in the list of top 101 restaurants, dishes, and people in the LA Times, and one of the best coffee shops in food and wine, not only in Los Angeles, but also in the US. And this is no accident. This is something born from Jack's desire to find balance in coffee and to create something for the public that represents the highest possible quality in a spirit of curiosity, discovery, and just an unprecedented, sincere service. Jack came to the coffee industry from a science background. He is a former biochemist. He's worked in biotech for over 11 years with some of the biggest companies developing cancer fighting drugs. During that time in his life, he trained and worked as a pastry chef and then discovered coffee. And that really was the moment that cemented his course for the foreseeable future is the pursuit of coffee. And you'll hear him talk about this in the episode today. I love the way Jack approaches the operation of Endorffiene. It is a singular business. He is the only one who makes the drinks. It is a highly curated menu. And this, I think, is on the extreme end of coffee in the way that we perceive a retail expression of coffee. This conversation covers the evolution of Jack's career from the medical field to pastry to coffee and through till today running Endorffiene, all of the things that have kind of gone into building what it is today, a lot of the challenges, the philosophies behind what Endorffiene does with its coffee, and some of the things that Jack has learned along the way that have evolved over these past years that Endorffiene has established itself as one of the most revered coffee bars in Los Angeles. And I would say one of the most interesting coffee bars, at least in the US. And so I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. So without anything else from me, let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with the founder of Endorffiene, Jack Benchakul. Well, Jack, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Thrilled to have you on the show. How's it going today?
Pretty good. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an honor. Thank you.
I appreciate that. We're having this call. You're in Thailand right now, right?
Yes, currently in Bangkok. Just spent a few days in Chiang Mai up north, but the most of the trip is here in Bangkok. It's where my family's from.
That's excellent. You know, Endorffiene has been in the news. I've seen people writing about it. You're an award winning cafe and a rather unconventional in a few different ways. And we'll get into that here. But I kind of wanted to get the story of your entry into coffee from professional background that still informs the way that you are doing coffee today. So let me just kind of ask you, where were you and how did you get here to coffee?
I started off in the sciences. Education wise, I was on the science track, primarily pre med. Thought I was going to go to medical school. I wanted to be a neurosurgeon actually when I was younger. My mom she's retired now, but she was an operating room nurse. And I was on that track until my senior year in college in UC San Diego. And then I realized that I didn't want to pursue many more years of schooling, which you would have to do if, especially to specialize in surgery, neurosurgery, medical school. But as the son of Asian immigrants, to not be a doctor or a lawyer or a rocket scientist is just not an option. And so rather than deal with that, I thought, okay, well, I'll be an optometrist. I can still be a doctor, and there's a little less schooling, and that should appease my parents. And then at that point, I moved to San Francisco from Los Angeles to start my studies to get ready for optometry school. And I was working at in a optometry office there. But then that's when I during a pre-examination, I met a woman who was working at Genentech, and she couldn't stop talking about how wonderful this company was. After her examination, we exchanged information. I went home, worked on my resume, I sent it to her, applied, and that was my entrance into biotechnology. I knew a little bit about the industry, but only from a general sense. I didn't have a secondary degree or a PhD, so I started entry level, which was manufacturing. And so this was like large scale manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. A lot of cancer fighting drugs, some growth hormone. The portfolio for the company was pretty deep, but it was very successful for at that time, small biotech company. So I started to move up the ladder there. Eventually, in my career in biotech, I became a scientist, which is very difficult to do if you don't have a master's or a few masters or a PhD. But at that point, I started to, it wasn't as fun anymore. There was just something very, I felt like something was missing. I looked towards maybe opening up a small business with my cousin who was living in San Francisco at the time, and she was finishing up her MFA in San Francisco. We opened up a small stationery and gift shop in like the Russian Hill district of SF. That gave me a certain amount of satisfaction in being a small business owner, but it just didn't feel complete. And try to think about things that I really, really love doing. And the only thing I could come up with was food. And so everything culinarily related was was a big driver for me. So I found a small French cooking school, Tante Marie, in SF, and their baking and pastry program was headed by a very talented pastry chef, Nancy Pitta, who was working at Boulevard Restaurant at the time. She was teaching the courses, and so at nights and on weekends, I took the courses, and then afterwards, there was an internship program or externship program that they would have their students go out after finishing the program, and they would work in bakery, pastry, a patisserie, or a restaurant of their choice. I ended up staging at Miette, which is in the Ferry Building in San Francisco. At this point, I thought that my life course was going to be in pastry because at that time I felt that baking and pastry has a very strong correlation to chemistry and the sciences. And I thought I was better suited to apply my education to my next career. But then that changed one day when I was working at Miette, and one of the pastry cooks went for a coffee run to a nearby coffee cart in the Ferry Building. She came back with the coffees. I grabbed mine. I immediately reached for cream to add it to the coffee, and she scolded me for doing that. And she asked me, well, why would you do that if you didn't know what the foundational flavors were? I was so embarrassed because it's true. I mean, how do you adjust for anything if you don't know what the base flavors
That's a very sciencey question.
are? So I put the cream down, I drank the coffee, and like the first sip, it was just mind blowing. I never experienced coffee in that manner before. Up until then, coffee was just something to get you through the day, or if you're cramming for finals, or something that you added cream and sugar to. but this didn't require any of that. So that started me down the rabbit hole of specialty coffee. Funny enough, that was my epiphany, and it was from Blue Bottle, and this was 2006. And I believe that it was off of James Freeman's cart, and I think he's still the CEO. He's definitely the founder of Blue Bottle. He had a coffee cart. I don't think he even had a brick and mortar yet,
Right.
and it was just it was phenomenal. And so that changed the course of everything for me. I sort of restructured how the next set of goals that I was going to achieve and the pathway towards it. But it went from bakery, patisserie to
Wow.
coffee bar.
And even farther back, it's science, stationery, bakery, patisserie, coffee bar. As a scientist, you are looking for that connection, but at the same time, you're wanting to, it seems, do something that's more fulfilling to you because of just what I imagine is some love loss in the large scale pharmaceutical manufacturing where you were. What was it about small business in particular that was something a little bit more soul satisfying than the route that you had gone on? Because from that point forward, after your stationary business, it seems like you were pretty set on craft and then supplementing it with the knowledge you had in science. It's an enhancer of that craft, but you seemed firmly entrenched in the idea that you wanted to be involved in something craft. But what is it about that area versus the sciences that you found ultimately won out?
I think ultimately it was pretty selfish motivation. I Up until that point with biotech and even with pre-med, I wanted to do something. It sounds really corny, but I really wanted, it was important for me to do something for my fellow man. So a lot of the drug development work that I did in biotech, a lot of it was cancer fighting drugs. And there was a real sense of fulfillment from that. But the further up the ladder I moved into the laboratory itself, and then from that, subsequently, there's a point where you're not on the bench top anymore. And so I found most of my time was in an office in front of the computer or but not actually running experiments, which to me that the hands-on of that was it was a lot of fun and it was more fulfilling and I felt like I was engaging more with the RAs. And even though scientists still don't engage with the patients that they're developing these pharmaceuticals for, there isn't much of that, but it still felt a little more tangible than the direction at which my career was going into. And so I think I came to a point where I was becoming more and more unhappy and I just couldn't put my finger on it. But my outlet was on the weekends and on time off at that point, going to restaurants, eating different foods, and then discovering that coffee, that epiphany with that coffee rivaled the moment that I had my first piece of sushi.
Hmm.
And the reason why that was so life changing, that piece of sushi, was because up until that point, I only regarded food as being purely for sustenance. I didn't grow up enjoying food at all. I love my mom, but she's a terrible cook.
Oh, no.
And so, but I just ate it because, it sustained me and she put this effort into it. And so those were the things that I treasured about that, but I didn't treasure the food itself.
Yeah. So the epiphany with sushi, with coffee, it has to feel like this It seems like you have this fascination with, the way things work and the intricacies of their inner world. And so when you have the epiphany about coffee, I'm getting in my mind this vision of Jack's mind where, you're just like going down this, maybe this rabbit hole of like, well, why is it doing this and why is it doing that? And well, I can't, how does coffee taste this good? That fascination, like that's going to spur you on to do things. And so now you obviously are going to pursue that. So how did you take the next step down the path of fascination to making it something more tangible than just a fascination?
So the practical side of me knew I had to have a plan. And one of my mentors in biotech, he was actually a ranger in the army, and he told me to always think about the deep fight. So the deep fight is not concerning yourself so much with the battle that's in front of your face and the one after that and the one after that and the one after that, but to consider the deep fight beyond those battles and see it holistically and be able to work backwards from there. And so for me, I knew that, okay, so now I want to open a coffee bar. And I know, well, at that point, that's how much I knew. And so I needed to work backwards from there to the point where I need to gain some experience first. And that started with when I moved back down to Los Angeles. At that point, I wasn't quite ready to leave biotech, mainly because financially it's hard to leave that salary and those wonderful benefits for the salary of a barista.
You don't say.
But I knew that I had to get some industry experience. And so upon moving back down to Los Angeles, while still working in biotech, I was working at Amgen out in Thousand Oaks. I applied to no less than 24 coffee
Wow.
shops for a part-time position. I guess I think, yeah, I must have, since I still had the day job, I was looking for evening or weekend work. And there was one coffee shop that actually returned my emails or phone calls. Starbucks wouldn't even have anything. Like, I heard nothing. It was like crickets.
Oh man, come on.
I was feeling very defeated, and it was like the 23rd or the 24th resume that I sent out, and I sent it out to a specialty coffee bar that was just about to open in Little Tokyo. And I actually told Ttaya, my cousin, best friend, and co-founder of Endorffeine, I said, you know what? If I don't hear anything back, then it wasn't meant to be. I'm just going to stop. I just need to stay in biotech, and this is my life course. But Bobby, the owner of Demitas Coffee, this was to be their first location. He called me in for an interview, and at the end of the interview, we hit it off pretty well. He's actually also a career changer. He was a lawyer previously, and he discovered specialty coffee, and that's why he wanted to open up Demitas. At the end of the interview, he told me that I was his last interview and his first hire. And
Wow.
I was trying so hard to fight back the tears. It was an amazing moment. And that was definitely the start. I knew that it had to start somewhere with a part time position. And this was also something that I explained to Bobby as well, that I was trying to learn as much as I could, not just about because I was so green and I had only brewed coffee at home, but I needed to learn what it was like to brew with proper commercial equipment and the methodology that happens in a commercial setting, but also learn the practical aspects of managing a coffee shop so that I could one day open my own.
So this experience that came at the right time, kind of meant to be, to get this experience with commercial equipment in a commercial setting with different than an enthusiast or a consumer. What during your time there, and I don't know, maybe subsequent experiences, did you learn about coffee that prepared you to do it yourself professionally?
I was quite sure that I would always be able to eventually get to a point of skill where I could execute proper brewing, but the concept of being able to interact with guests was terrifying for me. I'm an introvert by nature, and scientists deal with very small groups. It's like the perfect environment for an introvert. But I knew that opening a coffee bar was something, especially what we wanted to do with it. The guests would be up close and personal with us. And so it still does bring me quite a bit of anxiety on a daily basis, but I feel that the reward is a much more valuable take home than to be fearful of that risk. That was something that I was hoping that would come with quite a bit of practice in working behind the bar.
What is the reward?
With every experience in life, I believe that there are learning experiences. And the wonderful thing about connecting with guests is that I feel in a very small way that when they share their life stories, it's almost living vicariously through them. And I do appreciate the varied point of views that they bring. And the fact that I get to tap into all of that is also very self serving. But the fact that it's centered around coffee it just makes it that much better.
No doubt your concept and what you want to deliver to people with coffee is based on your own experiences and what you feel is the most valuable thing that you could offer people in the form of a business. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the concept was when you talked about how you wanted to, specifically bring something unique to the coffee industry through your business? What was that concept?
It definitely starts with the name. So endorphine, the word, it's an amalgam of two words, endorphin and caffeine. So endorphins are produced by our bodies and they sort of represent the self. And also like your experience can only be as good as an open mind will allow. The second half is the caffeine molecule, and that triggers an increase of dopamine in the brain, and that leads to feelings of pleasure. So these two things together, the self and being mindful, along with this wonderful drug, I think the self and then the science really represent what we're trying to achieve with endorphine. And also by stripping away everything else, it's sort of an escape.
In some ways, it feels like you're still in biotech.
I think it's, I don't struggle with the science, the why. A lot of that makes perfect sense to me. But what I find challenging is the craft side of this. Even in the way that I brew espresso is it's a far cry from when I was first training to brew espresso. In the beginning, we were taught to embrace the science and the numbers. And over the years, I started to move away from that because I felt that it was important to give just enough significance to our palates and palate development, and that side of the craft side of coffee is infinitely difficult, and it's not something that's tangible like science. And that's frustrating, but it's also the beautiful thing about, I think, food and drink.
So then how do you make decisions about menu curation and offerings and techniques that elicit certain flavors and experiences? There's infinite possibilities in terms of things that you could portray about a coffee, or the combinations of ingredients to interpret a coffee through a lens of milk, or I know you do a lot of cold brew, special cold brew. There's a lot of avenues to utilize, and you have to make a decision at some point to it, adhere to something that you present and say, you should drink this because it's delicious. How do you find yourself approaching those moments of decision where you do have to kind of come to rest on some techniques and some decisions on flavors and things like that?
For the most part, Endorffine, the coffee bar, is very focused in terms of its menu. And that's always been our way since day one. And we continue to pare down the menu constantly. We don't even have sugar or sweeteners available at the coffee bar because I want the main focus to be the coffee. But we do have I suppose it's an offshoot of Endorffine, the coffee bar. We have Endorffine ready to drink, and we can beverages. There are two coffees and two teas, and they are all Asian inspired flavors. And that lineup is where we, I guess, extend a little more creativity in terms of signature drinks with a little bit of sweetness. And it's sort of, I wouldn't say it's a compromise, but from day one, we've also wanted to have another company that would actually give guests another option besides a super focused, super pared down menu because we wanted to still be approachable without, I guess, compromising on the coffee centric menu that we have at the coffee bar itself.
That's interesting because you close off the option of having all of the customizations and other, we'll say, trappings. And for a lot of people, that's a decision that they make consciously. Like, we want to have like all of the different, like the syrups and the milks and the things like that. If it's relegated only to, in your case, a modest curated, we'll say, ready to drink menu, then you preserve the integrity of what you want to do with the live bar. And then you give yourself the control over how you interpret those options to satisfy that segment of the market with those ready to drink beverages. So I think it's pretty brilliant. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on paring down your menu and why you're continually paring down your menu on the bar. Is it just functional to make sure? Because I think you're the only one that works. You two, you and your cousin, are the only one that works, or you're the only one that works the bar. It's a very limited and highly specialized service model. Is it a practical choice, or is it also in combination with that something that's just an experiential element that you want people to receive? And what is that?
Yes, we are owner operated. We've never had any employees, so it's just myself on bar making. I've made every drink since we've opened in 2015. So we're in year 8 now. And my cousin Ttaya, she does everything else. And she's really the responsible for the aesthetic of Endorffine. And in terms of menu decisions and the reason why we continue to pared down the menu is not because we hate things that are sweet or
You're a
I
pastry
mean,
chef. I
I
mean,
eat, yeah. So I eat cake. Actually, I'm staring at a chocolate cake right now. But we believe that every restaurant or every coffee bar doesn't have to be all things to everyone, but especially with coffee and specialty coffee, endorphine is an expression of us. And the things that we have on the menu, even our ready to drink cans, which we literally batch ourselves. The only thing we don't do is physically can them. We have a co-packer that takes care of that. But those batches, I am mixing and batching those personally. But we wanted to have our hand in everything. And it was important to me that I be proud of every beverage that we make. And and I think when the moment comes when I am no longer happy with how a beverage is being presented by my own hand at Endorffine, then that's when we will take it off the menu. For example, starting upon our return to Los Angeles, we're going to remove hot lattes off of the menu. We've just recently, actually, about 90% of our menu has been Nordic style roasted coffee, and those tend to be very, very light roasts. And it has always been my opinion that lightly roasted coffee doesn't do too well in terms of expression if it is used in a beverage that has a bit too much milk, like a latte. So, actually, over the last few months, just before we left, we switched over entirely to brewing only Nordic style roasts. I think that it was important that all of our beverages remain balanced. Balance is a very important thing to me, and that is the driver behind removing one beverage off the menu. And also because I'm actually going to start roasting this year as well. And in doing that, because I am obsessed with Nordic style roasts, that fact, along with micro lots that we'll be using, because of their expression, they would really just disappear in an unbalanced drink. And so it's important that for us to actually continue to honor one of our tenets, which is balance.
can I ask, because if I'm going to listen to this as an operator of a coffee bar, I'm going to say, well, how do you make the business work? I mean, we need to be financially viable. And cutting off something like, oh, I don't know, a latte. It's not cutting off a fringe signature beverage. That being just one example, like having such a limited and purposefully curated menu as you do seems at first pretty impractical to a lot of people who are struggling to make their coffee business make money, be viable. They just need to, like, in that moment of decision, sure, maybe they'd like to set it up in a similar way, at least in a fraction of the way that you've been able to do. But they have to decide between their ideals and practicality. Have there been those moments for you? And how do you make it work?
I just wanted to add one thing. We're not removing iced lattes. We make iced lattes with cold brew, so it actually has more balance.
Oh,
But it's just that hot lattes are made with espresso, so it's very difficult to pull off balance in my opinion.
sure.
But iced lattes will remain.
There we go. Okay.
I think with any business venture, to say that there's no compromise that would definitely be a naive concept. But I think it's important to know what your deal breakers are. For me, I would just feel like I was being disingenuous if I served beverages to guests that I didn't personally enjoy consuming.
Mm.
And I've worked at a few cafes prior to opening Endorffine, and they're great cafes. But, and I think any barista will admit the same thing. There are certain drinks that you just may not agree with or didn't enjoy making for whatever reason. But I always put all of that aside because I wasn't the one paying the bills. I was working for someone else. And so it's important for me to execute the vision of my employer. But I also knew at those moments that when I would eventually open Endorffine after everything with my mom and leaving biotech and coming down this path, if I wasn't completely happy and satisfied with the decisions, then I just shouldn't do it because I, like many people, I have regrets and I don't have many, but the ones that I do have, they still stick with me and they still sting. And I knew that upon opening Endorffine, I just don't want to deal with those regrets
Mm.
because they just stay with you. And I think that's more important than, I guess, fearing whatever may come. It may be the wrong decision to take hot lattes off the menu. I don't know. But, and this has been a number of years in the works, like since we've been open. I've always felt that it wasn't, for me, it's just, there's just something about it that it always comes down to balance. And I think that it can be a little more convincing with a more balanced beverage.
Hmm. Well, people have received your concept pretty well over the years. You've been written about and praised by famous food writers and highly regarded in the community of Los Angeles coffee and coffee at large in general. So the response to this might actually be surprising to some people because you don't have sugar, you don't have the things that the people the populace wants these things, right? And you would think, oh, well, that's just going to drive people away. But your dedication to balance and integrity within the concept obviously is something that it resonates with people enough that you've been able to do this for 8 years. And I guess as you've done this over 8 years, how have people responded to the concept? What have been the most, I would say, gratifying or affirming responses to what you're doing in the face of what, because you have industry knowledge and experience, inherently there's a lot of risk with having such a pared down concept, all the way down to you making every single beverage. But again, you have people who are like, well, this is a great place to go. And sometimes they're closed because, Jack is in Thailand and then they're going to be open again. And then I'm going to go, and it works. And so who are these people and what are they saying and how have they reflected these values back to you?
It's always been important to us that we first had the respect of our peers and colleagues because through an absence of marketing or advertising, etc., we felt that it was important, one, for that sense of validation from them, and then two, because inevitably through time we would reach the ears of more through word of mouth. And for me, the word of mouth was it's sort of like peer review in science. Our proof of concept, it was very important that we had the backing of our colleagues all of the home geeks, the home brewers at home,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're not doing something right, they will rip you apart. And rightly so. I think it's like I said, we learn from all of these failures. We learned from that criticism, and that was very important to us. But we also knew that it would take time. If it was going to succeed, it would take time.
Mm-hmm.
We expected to not have the type of financial success that we saw our peers have. Our built-in plan was like the first 3 years. Before that point, our plan was, well, if it doesn't work at that point, then it just wasn't meant to be. But it was important to us that we do it right. And even now, I'm still learning. Like, I can't believe that I'm even talking about roasting this year when I feel like I'm still learning how to brew coffee. We went to, there's a La Cabra cafe here in Bangkok. Actually, there's two now.
And
And
they're in New York City, the first one, right?
yes, yeah, they're about to open another one in New York City, but they just opened their second one here in Bangkok. And I was chatting with the owners here, and I had the privilege to brew coffee on bar the other day. And I don't think you can tell from the video. I posted it, but like I don't think you can tell. But my hands were shaking. I was nervous. I am I'm anxious every single time that I make an espresso at Endorffine or brew a pour over at Endorffine, and it's because something could still go wrong, and it could be off, and it might not be balanced, and these are all the things that run through my head.
In what ways would you say you have grown over 8 years as the place is a reflection of your taste and your personalities, as you've said? And so if you're not going to enjoy a beverage yourself, it's something you're just not going to have on the menu. And I imagine your own tastes expand or shift or get refined in whatever direction, depends on your experiences. But the Jack of right now, today, versus when you first opened, what would you say the biggest differences are between the first year and now in terms of how you approach the menu, given that the constant's been balanced, but I imagine there's some variation now that's based on your experience.
I think the hope for the menu is to refine, continually refine, improve, potentially pare down. But I think the thing that has surprised both myself and Taya is the significance of the personal connection with guests. We naively believed in the beginning that the merits of well, properly brewed coffees would be more than enough. But time and especially the pandemic has shown us that the experience is so complex and has so much depth that it goes beyond proper extraction or drinkware or countertop materials or the type of music that's playing, the volume of the music. It's all of those things, but it's also sounds so corny, but sharing the life moments with our guests. Taya and I will tell you that the last thing we ever wanted to do was in the beginning was intrude on our guests' lives, because it wasn't that we weren't interested, we felt that that might have been a distraction to the enjoyment of the coffee. But we've realized that it's not just important for that experience, but it makes what we do that much more worthwhile. and that it's not just a transactional experience. And it took a pandemic for us to realize that,
Mm.
to learn that. Because for us that was the turning point. It was because of the pandemic that we began connecting with our guests on a deeper level that we didn't have before.
And is that because the emotion and the social need of the moment was just so on the surface for everybody and it was unavoidable?
There was definitely the need to belong and not feel alone. And I mean, we were all going through it, but it was remarkable that everyone, I mean, our guests and us included, there was something that was so important about that ritual of coffee. And then really touching that for us, because they could have had coffee at home, they could have had coffee elsewhere, but our guests chose to have those coffee moments with us. We were actually also personally delivering our ready to drink cans and our cold brew. We had cold brew growlers and retail bags of coffee that we were personally delivering throughout the city
Nice.
during the early days of the pandemic. I'd say for that first year. And we went everywhere. Like as far south as Long Beach and as far north, gosh, Santa Clarita Valley. We went everywhere throughout LA County. We put no limits on it because we were just flattered and touched that people wanted to support, but they wanted to see our faces too, which I found surprising. But it was a way of us bringing Endorffine to them, and we remember each and every one of those people, and it's fantastic. But and the momentum hasn't stopped since. I think it's been great.
It feels like that was your second epiphany of coffee.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, that's a necessary ingredient and one of those things that is the intangible made tangible. And sometimes, the light hits it just the right way. You can see it, and we all experience it in some ways, even as, if you're a barista, not even an owner of a place, and you can see some kind of a energy transference between the cup's handoff. And if you're paying attention enough, then I think you could probably see those things a lot more often when you're working behind the counter. And especially if, like yourself, you've got such an attention to these moments now, that momentum obviously is going to keep going because you can't unsee that. It feels like, now it's such a necessary ingredient to what makes a well executed brew of coffee worth it. No doubt the people who farm that coffee would be thrilled to know that there's not just that, technically accurate and, flavor balance there, but it's also this magic moment with the customer being like, this is a life thing, as it is for them. And I appreciate this, what you're saying here, because sometimes in the hustle of work, yeah, and even in the obsession of coffee and technology and everything else, we can forget about those things, but they don't go away simply because we don't focus on them. I really appreciate that sentiment. I have a last question for you here. And I believe so much of what you've shared here has been so powerful. I really appreciate it. Your advice to owners and operators who want to, or maybe need to, make decisions and take steps with their business with patience and clarity. So much of what we do is really making things that might not be urgent more urgent than they need to be, or making hasty decisions, etc. And there's a patience about what I hear you talking about and how you've approached your entry into business these 8 years. So what kind of advice would you give to operators that you think would really benefit them as they take steps to create something beautiful with their businesses?
Failures are inevitable, so plan accordingly. Just focus on the deep fight and plan years ahead and then work backwards from there. Focus on a strong concept. This one is very important. Strong concept. And know that success does not occur overnight. It may take years. But if you believe in yourself, if you believe in the mission, then you'll be successful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack, for taking time today to share your story and share some wisdom with us here. I think it's wonderful to see constance and dedication and the intentionality to the mission that you have with Endorffine. And again, it's been great. So, how can people stay in touch with you and find out where you are, what you're doing there in LA?
We are on social media, so Instagram at Endorffiene. That's probably the best way. We're trying to be good about posting as often as possible, at least pertinent information. But I think, yeah, we're also on Facebook, but Instagram's pretty great. You can also reach us at endorffine.coffee. That's our website. And whether it be through Instagram or email, which is on the website, I am always happy to return and respond to questions. I think it's important that more people have more information, especially if we can exchange information and share, we can definitely grow the industry.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack. Again, it's been wonderful. I appreciate all you're doing in the industry and what you've created and your words here today.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I really love the balance that Jack brings not only to his menu, but to himself and the operation of this business. Obviously, as the only employee, Endorffine has to shut down in order for him to do anything. And when I say that, what I mean is you don't get the impression that this experience that you have at Endorffine is what you would imagine it might be if you heard the options and the menu and maybe just the bullet point list of features. You might expect, oh, that's just a place that is limiting options based on snobbery in coffee. And that's not the case. Obviously, we heard Jack talk about the connection and the stories with customers, the hospitality aspect that completes this picture. Yes, it's a very curated menu. It's a highlight of very specific flavors in a way that he, as essentially a chef, would want you to experience them. And that is amazing. And I love that he gets to do this and that he's created this. We need businesses like this just as much as businesses that do a lot of options out there. And so his ability for him to be consistent over time with this and have the integrity of his convictions in a place like Los Angeles, which has so many different versions of coffee bars out there where you could compare and contrast yourself all day long, I think is really admirable. I think it's really inspiring. And I really enjoyed this conversation today. So I hope you did as well. Huge thank you to Jack Benchakul for joining us on the show. If you want to learn more about Endorffine, then you can check him out over at endorffine.coffee and follow on Instagram at Endorffine. You follow links in the show notes, of course, to go there. And if you're in Los Angeles, definitely make time to visit Jack and get some coffee and find balance in your experience. So if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode, feel free to reach out. Chris at keystotheshop.com is where you can do that. And that's also where you can reach out if you're interested in Keys to the Shop consulting. Chris at keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of our show, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I always appreciate you investing into these episodes, and I do hope that they have given you a lot of value, and they continue to do so as we are well into the 6th year of the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, share the episodes with a friend, and have an awesome day. As always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.